Hey Facebook, how you doing today? We are coming to you to talk to you about data theft and why people are stealing your stuff. Thumb drives, cell phones, Henri's brain.
Nobody wants that.
Yeah, nobody wants Henri's brain. But I've got Henri here so we can talk a little bit about it and we can kind of bat some ideas around. I think the one thing that I always see, thank you for joining us first off.
Yeah, of course.
Appreciate it. Todd as a service didn't want to join us, so we told him to get out of here. But the one thing I think I see a lot of small businesses, because I know we're short on time sometimes, is that we walk in and these clients, like I'll have clients say, I want to protect everything. And it's like, it's one of those concepts when you protect everything, you protect nothing.
Yeah.
You lock down an infrastructure so greatly that people try and figure out ways to bypass it just because they can't do their work.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the things about security is that you have to think of it as like a sliding scale. It's either it's going to be ease of access or it's going to be secure. You really can't have both together.
Right.
And one of the things that really sticks out in my head is that if it's easy for you to access your data, it's easy for somebody else to access your data.
Right.
You almost kind of have to make it a little difficult. Remember the passwords. Have multiple passwords for different things. Make sure that you have policies in place that secure things and tighten them down. Obviously, that means that the day-to-day tasks, logging into different websites or different systems, or having limited access to this or that, that's going to happen. But that also means that for everybody else, it's the same thing.
Right. Well, you know what? I'll throw on there. The one thing that we always think about is we're worried about securing our infrastructure. And that's part of why we talked about data theft. And they asked me what we wanted to talk about this week, and data theft was what I mentioned. It's the insider threat, right? I mean, it's at the end of the day, you're concerned about your security. We're concerned about your security. We're going to do everything we can to secure your infrastructure, but you can't eliminate the end user from the equation.
Oh, definitely.
The end users, that's where 99% of data theft happens. Our integrity issues. And a lot of that's not just driven by IT solutions. We can go and we can say, okay, we're going to restrict thumb drives. That's easy. I mean, we can go in there right now, restrict thumb drives. We can say, okay, we're going to restrict whether or not people can use their mobile device to store data on. We can restrict whether or not they can use Microsoft OneDrive in their Office 365 tenant, so that way they can't store files in cloud storage.
Right.
We can restrict whether or not they can access websites like Dropbox or Box.com or ShareFile or anything. The negative behind that is then they're going to go and find some way to get around that.
Right. There's always going to be a new way to do it. One of the things I think about while you're talking about this, I used to work back in the school system, and we used to do the same thing. What websites are we going to restrict the kids from? We can't have them go to this website, and this website, and this website.
Right.
Sorry, kids these days, they're going to go home and Google, how do I get to this website if they put this restriction on? The answers are out there.
Yeah.
I come back the next day, and they're going to be at websites.
So
how did you even get in there?
I had an employer at one point that I worked for, one of my previous companies, and they said, well, we want to restrict thumb drives, we want to restrict cell phones and everything else. So we did that. We went across the board. We said, okay, we'll restrict it all. And I said, well, from a policy standpoint, you still can't really stop people from putting attachments on emails.
Yeah.
And they said, well, wait, no, we could do that. And I said, well, you could, but you still have to send attachments to your clients. So how are you going to send?
Now you can't send
attachments to your clients. Yeah. And so, you think about was it Chelsea Manning?
Yeah.
That was how she got the files out.
Yeah.
She created like a Yahoo account and just emailed files out in the open.
All it takes is one clever way to exfiltrate information that you didn't think about.
Right.
Or a simple way that everybody needs to use this task and the way that it can be used alternatively in order to get that information.
Well, and I think that goes back to like the simplest solution is always the easiest solution, right? Like you protect data theft. You say, okay, well, we're going to restrict all these policies, but you got to think about your end user, right? Your end user, they may not be an IT professional, but they know that they can send an attachment via email.
Right.
So they go and they create a Yahoo account. And they just start emailing stuff to themselves.
Oh yeah.
And so that goes into the other part, right? The managerial side, which is why we kind of have this talk. The managerial side of this is how do you restrict that? You can't. So you have to do that through policy.
Right.
Policy, auditing. Have an audit trail for things. There's the mechanisms in Office 365 as an example to be able to pull mail flow traffic and see what kind of mail flow is going out.
Right.
Maybe you have employees or you have a concern about data coming out of your organization via email. even to be able to say, okay, we've identified this as an issue, and now you can put mail flow restrictions to require external emails to be approved by certain people in the company, like managerial level, to approve that email going out of the company.
Right.
And you can say, okay, if it has an attachment, I want it to be approved by somebody in my company is going to approve that email going out without an attachment or with an attachment.
The other thing is looking at the kind of access that the everyday average employee would have. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is when you open up shares on a network and you don't restrict the ability for people to access the information in those shares, now all of a sudden a low-level employee that doesn't need to access, say, patient health records now has access to this information. You haven't restricted the share. You haven't put policies on to make sure that only certain people or certain accounts are allowed to access this information. Right. And now that person can get into whatever folder on the share that they want to, right, get whatever information they have, and then take this other option.
It's like that. It's that same concept of privileged access. Let's say,
right.
Start with when you're looking at your data security, you're looking at data theft as a whole. Look at your organization and start with this policy where you say, okay, deny access to all.
Right.
And so do it across the board. Don't say I need this to do my job. Say if I looked at my company and I wanted to say let's deny access to everybody for everything right now. It's like the entire infrastructure, all the files, everything. And not saying you need to physically do this, but this is part of strategy.
Right.
And then you plan that out on paper and you say, okay, now once we've said, okay, deny all for everything, now let's start to add in what do they need access to.
Right.
Instead of the opposite, which is what can I restrict my employees or my company from doing, look at it from, okay, if I restricted everything from everybody, what do they truly need access to? And then that's how you build that data security policy.
Yeah, it's the same thing we see working with a firewall.
Right.
Deny all policies going out and then start loosening that a little bit based on what you need, what right. needs to communicate out, what needs to communicate
right.
in.
Right. And then having a really solid policy for how do you audit that. And that's the other part, right? Knowing who's accessing what files and when they're accessing them, and looking, having a software product in there that's going to look at when those files are being accessed and when there's things that don't match certain patterns as far as file access.
Right.
Looking at email traffic, you don't necessarily need to have, not to the level where you're actually inspecting their inboxes. You could do that if you needed to, but have a good archiving product out there. I mean, we've got a bunch of archiving products that we use for that.
Oh yeah.
Have an archiving product where you can go back and you can audit that email traffic and see what's actually going in and out if you ever have a question. The other part of that is, really the IT security policy. Mm-hmm. What are we pushing down from an infrastructure standpoint? I think the last, the one thing that I think that we don't talk a lot about, and we don't talk about it because we're an IT company, is it's all about how you run your business.
Right.
It's things like, do you do a formal exit interview with your employee? Are you actually, talking about data security and confidentiality and highlighting that during the hiring process and during the termination process, and about why confidentiality is important to you, and are they signing agreements for that?
Right.
Do you issue company-owned devices? That's a really good one. Are you issuing company-owned cell phones, or are you managing their cell phones? Because
right.
if you're managing them, even if it's not going to stop them from taking the data, it gives them that extra understanding that you are watching what is happening.
Right, and of course there's software that can sandbox applications on a phone, so that obviously it's their phone, they're doing whatever they want in off hours, but as soon as they access their email, right. that's being monitored by the company. As soon as they're accessing anything within that sandbox environment, the company knows about it. They know what they're doing on it. Right.
I mean, things like having, have your IT professional or the managerial level have a whole drawer full of thumb drives.
Yeah.
And if your sales guy comes to you, or an account manager, or one of your engineers, and says, hey, I need a thumb drive for this, let them take a company on thumb drive so they actually have a thumb drive. I mean, you can go back and collect that in the future. It's a lot easier when you're actually providing the medium for data storage,
right?
To not encourage people to have data theft, because I think a lot of the times you see data theft happen, it's not a malicious attack. It's not because the employee left your company and said, hey, I want to leave with all this data. They left with the data because they were using a medium to store the data that you didn't offer to them.
Right.
They were like, okay, well, I'm going to open a Dropbox account because I don't have access to that at my company.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to bring my own personal thumb drive in so I can move my presentation back and forth on a weekend to work on it on my off hours. And maybe that's not a policy of yours. Maybe you don't want that to happen, but that's the reality, is that they're doing that.
Oh, yeah.
So now they run around with this thumb drive, and 3 months later they say, oh, I remember that presentation I was working on for my last company. It would be really nice if I had that for my new company because I could pull some of the data over for that. next thing you know, they remember they have this thumb drive buried in a cup holder in their car.
Oh yeah, sitting right there with all that information.
Right, and it'd be a lot easier as part of the issuance process, issuing devices and issuing resources to be able to say, okay, we have those resources, and have a good IT partner that can actually help guide you with that.
Right.
One of the things that I constantly kind of go back to is I've seen more and more data breaches happen because of third-party services that have been added into infrastructure. And mostly it has nothing. The IT department has no idea it even happened because it's the marketing department that did it.
Yeah, this seems to be almost a weekly basis. Some of the security sites that I visit and read up, the podcasts I listen to, it's like a weekly basis that somebody has discovered that their systems were infiltrated at some point in time, and information may have been gotten.
Right.
And yeah, you're absolutely right. You see all of these third-party applications or add-ons, things like that. It's not even managed directly by the organization.
Yep.
May not even be managed by the main application that does things. It's just this one little application that this company uses that had an issue with the software, the way that it was developed,
right,
and somebody was able to exploit it.
Yeah.
And of course, I think the other thing is knowing what you as a company are taking on. And I give you an example. There was a hotel chain recently that took on a smaller hotel chain and brought it in. What they didn't realize is that months earlier, that smaller hotel chain, they had been breached.
Right.
So now as the parent company, they're owning this. They're being questioned about, you had a hotel breach. And they have to explain, well, no, it wasn't our data records that were breached. It was this other smaller hotel chain that we brought in. They didn't realize it. And yeah, you hear about it every week.
Right.
And really, it's all about being smart, not only about your own systems and your own software, the primary software that you use, but even knowing a lot about the add-on software or
right,
the little extension software that might go into something.
Well,
kind of keeping your.
I was going to say that's like really where it comes down to whether or not, when we talk about add-on software, right,
Mm-hmm.
where it comes down to whether or not you really as a business owner or executive have an understanding as to what's installed in your infrastructure,
Right.
what's running, what kind of traffic's traversing your firewall.
Oh yeah.
We see it a lot where we get, we bring a new client on board and we're putting a Swarm unit in, or we put in a Sophos firewall, and we're pulling reports for the first time, and we're seeing all these different programs traversing the network that transmitting large amounts of data that nobody even knew existed. Like
Right.
they're going, well, I don't know why would somebody have that program on their computer, and we have to explain, well, they probably shouldn't. And that's really the
it's
first
probably
awareness.
installed by somebody that just wanted to do this or this,
Right.
and
right.
it does more
Right.
than what they expect.
Right. And so I think that's really important is, have a solid IT partner that can pull that data. Can they pull large or unusual data transfers and actually see that traffic traversing your network? Because
Right.
that's a key indicator, Can they pull an audit trail to show you what kind of software applications are installed on your infrastructure and are accessing, your various different internet ports and things like that through your firewall? Is there an audit trail for when devices are plugged into USB ports?
Yeah.
You don't necessarily have to say, okay, we're restricting USB drives from the computers, because you still need those to some extent. There's use cases for those, but is there a way to actually audit that to show that somebody plugged that in?
Yeah.
And is your IT partner able to provide that to you? And then the last really big part, I think, is your IT partner able to actually show you through some form or mechanism archival data from email traffic?
Right.
Whatever, whether it's actual files transmitted or it's emails. If somebody deletes those emails, does your IT partner have the ability to actually pull that archival data for you and show that to you? And if they don't, the problem you run into at that point is liability, data theft, and then also the data loss, the data you lose when that person transitions out.
Yeah.
Because that's valuable information for you and your business. So. Anyways, I appreciate all of you joining us today. We wanted to really kind of keep this more about kind of things that are relevant to the business world right now. Next week we're going to come up with another topic too that we can talk to you about as well. But we hope that data theft was important to you. We're gonna, if you have any questions or comments or anything, put the questions in the comments. We can go ahead and reach out to you directly and let you know any direct answers. We have lots of products that we can provide as a solution to you that can help you address each of these issues we've talked about. and then hopefully we can have an open discussion with you about it too. So, definitely leave some comments in there, leave some questions in there, because we want to be able to reply back to you and get you answers if you're looking for them. And we look forward to seeing you next week.